So our final panel today is Bridging the Talent Gap, Critical Mineral Skills for a Green Future. And this is a really important topic for the Critical Minerals Association UK. Our Perceptions and Engagement Working Group, which is chaired by Lucy Crane and Chris Stockey, has been working with multiple organisations to raise awareness of, one, the importance of critical minerals, and two, to help reduce the future skills gap. And earlier this year, we organised an event for over 100 students to learn about careers in critical minerals at the Natural History Museum. My colleague Aileen has been involved in a number of the initiatives that are taking place to work together with different organisations on this topic. So in this panel, we'll be hearing and exploring the different roles of universities, industries and governments, and how they can maximise education and recruitment initiatives and the ways in which they can work together. We'll be welcoming Professor Francis Wall from Camborne School of Mines, Professor Gavin Bridge from Durham University, George Dunleavy from the Department for Business and Trade, and this will be chaired by Lucy Crane from Cornish Lithium. So over to you, Lucy.
Oh, it's a squishy. Yeah, well, excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction, Kirsty. And I'm very aware that we are the last slot of what has been quite a full-on day. But I think you'll all agree it's been fantastic talking about risk, talking about finance opportunities. I'm very encouraged to see that ESG has been the thread that's kind of woven through all of the discussions that we've had, as well as access to data, innovation, all of these things that are going to be needed for us to deliver the minerals that this energy transition actually requires. But the one thing that underpins all of that is people. We're all people. We all work in or are associated with the mining and minerals industry. And it's not new to any of us that actually attracting new talent and retaining talent in the industry is one of the really big challenges that we've got. If we're going to have the skills to actually deliver this energy transition that is underpinned by minerals, then actually we need a whole suite of new people coming from different backgrounds to be able to actually deliver that. So we don't want to preach to the choir today. We all know that the minerals industry that's a bit of a challenge for us. We don't want to talk about the problems because I think we're probably all quite well versed on that. But the fantastic panel that we've got lined up today, we want to actually come up with, what actually are some tangible solutions to this? What steps are industry, academia, and the government actually taking towards trying to address this talent gap? And what does that actually look like? So we've got a brilliant team up here on stage to try and discuss that. So if I can ask you to introduce yourselves, please. So Francis, if we could start with you, please.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and for the invitation to join the panel. So I'm Francis Wall. I'm a professor of applied mineralogy at the Camborne School of Mines in the University of Exeter, and we are the UK's multidisciplinary mining school. So we're teaching geology degrees, and from September 2025, again, mining, UCAS entry at the school. We're also teaching things like degree apprentices that we can discuss. We have a suite of master's courses, and then, of course, PhDs, and also training early career professionals. So that's what we're up to.
Wonderful. Thank you, Francis. Gavin?
Thanks very much, Lucy, and thanks to CMA for the invitation to be on the panel today. So I'm an economic geographer, and I'm a fellow of the Durham Energy Institute. I work in a geography department. It's a cohort of around 800 undergraduates and master's students across 4 years. And half of those are physical scientists trained in the STEM subjects. Myself, I'm a social scientist, so depending on how charitable you are, I'm either not STEM or I'm earth science adjacent. Because most of my work is on the extractive industry. I've done work on oil and gas and mining. My PhD was on restructuring in the copper industry. More recently, my work has been on the battery sector, particularly looking at issues of the supply chain. And I've been working with a range of other colleagues within the university in earth sciences, in chemistry, in biosciences, and in law to think about what education and research might look like on critical resource supply chains. So it's in that context that I'm on the panel today.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then George?
Thank you very much, Lucy. My name is George Dunleavy. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at the Department for Business and Trade, where I look after domestic critical minerals policy. Really glad to be here today to discuss education and how we can help the workforce of the future for critical mineral mines refining and recycling in the UK.
Wonderful, thank you. And as well as chairing today's discussion, I'm here with an industry hat on. So I'm a geologist by training. I head up the ESG team at Cornish Lithium. So we're looking at developing lithium projects down in the southwest of England. But I also sit on the Committee for Women in Mining UK, as well as the Young Mining Professionals. And I am actually on the Durham Earth Sciences Advisory Board as well. So we have a real mix of interests and backgrounds looking at how can we actually bring new talent and retain talent within the industry. So if we focus on the role that universities have to play, perhaps initially, how do you think universities can adapt their curriculums and research priorities perhaps to address this demand for skills professionals? Or are there any kind of innovative education models that you think are particularly effective in trying to deliver this? So maybe Frances, if we start with you, if that's all right, please, because I was looking at you.
Yes, okay. Well, maybe I'll start from, if you like, there's a pyramid, and we always want to have research-led teaching, and I think it's almost business as usual, that often when we make projects now, they are really, we call them trans-disciplinary projects, so we reach right across to social sciences and ecology and business, circular economy, people and so on. And I think that that's really taking the subject across the university, and I think we're certainly seeing much more interest in critical minerals from our colleagues across the university, and that will move into the teaching remit as well. So that's good. People, engineers that aren't miners and so on are seeing the opportunities, and that certainly is working.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I suppose a lot of people aren't necessarily that aware of the mining industry, or the fact that you don't just have to be a geologist or an engineer to work within it, as Gavin's a great example of. And yeah, that exposure through transdisciplinary approach sounds fantastic. Yeah, so Gavin, how do you see that from the social science perspective?
Yeah, so if the question is about adjusting research priorities, I don't feel this is the right venue, or indeed that we really have to shift research priorities. We've heard today quite a lot of valorization of the kind of research relationship within UKRI and research universities as a source of innovation in the sector. That said, there are some kind of structural drivers that are kind of shifting the way that research and education, particularly drivers around, as Frances says, interdisciplinarity, and around greater external collaboration with a range of external partners. I think a question for us, and I'd be interested to know what people think, is, what is a critical minerals job? So, my starting point for this is it's not necessarily geoscience or metallurgy. As we've heard very eloquently earlier on, many of the issues around critical minerals are above ground, as Sarah Gordon explained just in the last session. So that means things like law, like planning, digitalisation, logistics are increasingly an important part of delivering these projects. And many of the skills for that will be either people who have some knowledge of geoscience but are maybe not fully trained in geoscience, or they'll be people who have a range of different skills. And we've also heard today about the kind of the way in which critical minerals as a kind of an empirical reality in the UK is about a range of imported materials. So you actually think where those jobs are, they're in the processing sector, they're in the downstream sector as well as the upstream. So actually this is a very plural, quite diverse sector in terms of jobs. And I think that does speak to the range of disciplines and training opportunities that are available through universities, but also other parts of the educational ecology, things like further education, which we may speak to about later.
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, jump in. Right, three. You asked what's innovative, and I tried to write down three things I can say very quickly. So we have in our politics department, there's a colleague there that we have a people in mining group, and they do things for the students and bring in people from industry to talk about mining and all the subject in the round. And so that's one thing. When the mining degree was paused at Camborne School of Mines, industry stepped up and worked with colleagues of mine there to actually make a degree apprenticeship. So they stepped right in and made that step and the innovation and really took the lead, which you have to do on the degree apprenticeship. And then coming into the FE world, that's really different to the university world. And I have connections with Truro and Penwith College. And I think that's been a really good learning experience, because we kind of in the universities, I think we like to sit in an international context and a national context, don't we? And then we do look at the regions and we want to promote education, engineering and industry in the regions. But for the FE colleges, they're very much regional based, really talking to that regional need. And a lot of our subject, wonderful though it may be, is really too niche. So they have to work out, they're training engineers or electricians or carpenters, and then maybe we can help with the more specialist skills to go in so that those people are then ready to work on the mines when they're ready to employ them as they ramp up.
Yeah, and I think those are fantastic points, and I think we can't underestimate the role that industry actually has to play in that as well. Obviously, something that's very important to us at Cornish Lithium is the relationship with the local communities, and schools outreach and engagement has been a really important part of that. And it's fantastic to see young people actually starting to, so in Cornwall, we've got amazing mining heritage, which is great, but people don't necessarily see mining as a career opportunity for the future. They learn about it in history lessons. And just the impact of individual companies going out and doing outreach and engagement, Cornish Metals, for example, are also fantastic at that, local to us. That's great on a kind of individual company basis, but how can we have more of an impact as an industry as a whole, perhaps, rather than just individual companies going out? Because it's brilliant that we've got transdisciplinary research happening within the university, but that's once people are at university. What can we do to kind of increase that pool of people who are looking to go to university and maybe getting interested in the mining sector? And I don't know, George, if you want to talk about the recent review that Skills England have been doing, perhaps, and how we've got an opportunity to influence that.
Yeah, of course. I think the role of government as well there really is that big picture view, not just what do we need the next 1 or 3 years, but what's our kind of 10-year plan for critical minerals in the UK. And building off that ambition, you will have seen perhaps in July of this year, Skills England was launched. That was from the Prime Minister and Secretary of State for Education. And I hope you've all read that report, because critical minerals does get a look in there, which we had to have some long conversations with the Department for Education to justify why critical minerals are so important for not just the UK economy now, but the industries of the future, especially those green industries. I won't read the quote out to you in full, but you'll see it talks about skilled physical scientists, engineers, and other critical minerals-related skills. So more than just a kind of classic idea of somebody in a mine, it's that whole kind of ecosystem around mining. And the aim of that Skills England piece is to form a coherent national picture of where the skills gap exists, to really map out what are the roles needed, what kind of skills are needed, and how government can devise policy appropriately. So I would say it's that kind of big picture piece.
Which is brilliant. What are kind of the next steps from that, though? Because it's great that, critical minerals has actually been name-checked, but what are the kind of tangible things that we can hope for or expect following on from that?
Yeah, I think we're all waiting a little bit with bated breath as to what the result from that. I mean, ideally, I could imagine it to be, in this part of the country, these skills are required, yet a local university might not offer that training. Therefore, what can be done to help bridge that gap? I also wonder if, having spoken to an analyst recently in DBT, much talk's made about SIC codes and how it's really hard to, sorry, this is too technical, it's really hard to gather data on how many people are doing that sort of job, because the SIC codes are so outdated according to critical mineral jobs. I mean, we don't currently have any critical mineral mines in production, and so how can there be a SIC code to really say, oh, there's this many lithium miners and there's this many chemical engineers able to do this mineral? And so I would hope that an outcome of the Skills England could be to say, we will look to update those, but unfortunately I can't prejudge the results of that review until it's completed.
That's going to be really important for us to interface, because down in the southwest there are lots of things. There's a local skills improvement plan, which I think comes from the government, doesn't it? And then there are Cornwall Council has its own skills plans and things. So all these things need joining up, because we're thinking about it a lot and working between all the education providers and the industries. So we have a Shared Prosperity Fund, the Georesources Sector Strengthening Project, and we're trying to collect information from the companies on what skills will be needed so we can make a good model. And of course, the trouble is you're still on an upwards trajectory.
Trying to work it out. Yeah.
Yes, so it's quite a work in progress. And I think for me in the university, not a schools education specialist, it's hard to see sometimes which plans are coming from where. I had to ask a lot of questions to try and learn about all these different plans, so having quite a clear line from Skills England to interface with all the local plans would be really helpful.
Yes, yeah, I'll definitely make that point to them. I know the process is still ongoing.
Yeah.
So Lucy, your question to us, what can the sector do collectively? So one of the figures, the statistics that resonates in my head here is if you look at earth science or geoscience, undergraduate, number of taking geoscience or earth sciences at university between 2014 and 2019, that fell by 40% in the UK. Yeah. So there's an investigation, if you like, as to why that is. There's some interesting structural trends around that, we might say. But what is clear is it's not that people are not going to university. So people are going to university and they're going to study a range of different subjects. And many of those will have a STEM component to them. So some of them are going into environmental sustainability, some of them are going into environmental science. So if you like, that pipeline of people whom the industry is looking for are there, but they're not necessarily going into the geoscience and earth science degrees. So I think, if that's the kind of underlying reality here, you've kind of got, which problem is it? Is it that they don't know about you, in which case that's quite an easy problem to solve? Or is it that they know about you and they don't like you, in which case it's a different order of problem? And that suggests to me that either there is a piece of work here which is about engaging with people quite early on in that process where they're thinking about degree programs or they're thinking about what they do next with their life, and I know CMA has been doing some work on this, and I think that 2022 paper, the white paper that CMA put out, is really good on this, because it recognises that part of the problem here is kind of the work of cultural imagination, is to kind of show aspiration, what the possibilities are in this space. But I think there really is a bit there which is about reimagining and talking differently about what these roles can be, and some of that's already going on. If I can, as a slight outsider here, I think some of the inherited language that may have come from earlier waves of the mining industry trying to justify itself, really doesn't resonate with many young people now. So to pick one that's occasionally in the air, if it's not grown, it has to be mined. Well, possibly, but think about the circular economy. Right, there's an alternative sourcing, and we know it can't do everything, but there's a sense there that some of those narratives really don't land with young people who are thinking, who are quite passionate, and who are interested in making a difference, all the things that the sector wants. So I think there is a piece of work there that is, for better or worse, cultural in its character and goes quite early on. It's about demonstrating that either through place, as you're suggesting, in region, or through an early curriculum, through schools. And then there's a bit more that is more about the technical skills and how those might be developed, not only through geoscience and traditional earth science degrees, but perhaps through a suite of other STEM-orientated subjects that provide a training that can then be taken forward.
Yeah, and I think that is such a relevant point, and there's a couple of things I'd like to follow up on from that. So the first is, okay, that's brilliant. What are actual things that industry can do then to help support that? Because it sounds like if you've got transdisciplinary learning happening within universities now, that's a brilliant opportunity for perhaps industry to come in and maybe engage with students who aren't the typical geology students or mining engineering students, for example. And I don't know what structures exist that make it easier for companies, industry, to actually approach universities and get involved. Do you have to know somebody there? Do you kind of advertise yourselves? How does it work?
You just contact us and say that you're interested in meeting other people, and that's likely to work. That reminds me immediately of a slight hiccup when we've tried to, you wanted to meet some ecologists and then didn't quite get invited to the career fair, because I don't think anyone believed that Cornish Lithium would want to go to the biosciences career fair. They thought you'd only turn up at the Camborne School of Mines one or something. And so there's some education that we need to do perhaps in our universities as well. But you want to meet people across the picture.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing that Gavin, you brought up, you just touched on, and has been mentioned in a couple of the other talks, is, okay, we want this energy transition to be just and fair and actually an opportunity for everybody,
Yep.
which is no small task. And how do we actually help raise aspirations
Yep.
and reach perhaps parts of the community or parts of society who might not be on that trajectory to naturally go to university and study a degree anyway? How can we try and kind of increase those levels of aspiration? You got any ideas for that?
I want to sneak in my good... Oh, yeah.
No, please.
You go first.
Okay,
You
go
go
ahead.
first, because
Okay.
I wasn't quite...
Okay.
I was going to answer a
Yeah.
slightly different
Yeah,
question, so I
okay.
want to defer to you
Yeah.
if you're answering.
So there's lots of potential answers to this, but one thing that strikes me, so if you look at the number of people who now want to go and study, whether it's through the FE sector or through university, study criminology, it's astonishing, the number of people who want to study criminology. And really, what is criminology? Criminology is a kind of a science of interpretation. It's a bit like geology. It's reading signs, putting clues together, understanding how things have come to be as they are, and then taking a set of steps from there. So the sense of a kind of a curious, puzzle-orientated understanding is certainly something that young people warm to. So you can't say this is something young people don't want. They absolutely do. So why are they studying criminology? Well, there's something to do with a whole set of TV shows and everything else that draws people in. There's a visibility in the cultural realm of that type of profession that isn't just about the rocks, that is about kind of understanding and piecing things together. And it's very easy to kind of say, well, that's all cultural and soft, and let's have a few kind of TikTok accounts. But I think it is deeper than that. It is deeper than that. But there is something there about what has happened to young people's attraction to particular pursuits and ideas, that it really isn't that different to, at an interpretive level and piecing things together, that constitutes good earth science. So it's not an implausible model, I think, to talk about that. I think the other thing is, you think about other sectors, Elon Musk features largely, very visibly in this, but part of the kind of technological objects that have drawn people in, whether it's large rockets or fast cars, mining is not without its large technical objects of fascination. So it's demonstrably possible to make a cultural project around those type of technological objects. So if that's the case, then what does that look like for a sector like the mineral sector or for mineral processing? That's one piece. I think there's something else, which is around a kind of an ethic of care, which is quite a different orientation to this. But if you think about the foundational industries, circularity and materials reprocessing, that's about material stewardship. It's about resource efficiency. It's about looking after custody of materials over multiple generations. So there's a narrative there. If this is a cultural piece, absolutely, I'm not saying it's all cultural. Don't get me wrong. But there is a cultural piece if it's about aspiration, if it's about the kind of the emotional, felt, what draws people in, what keeps people motivated. So I think particularly with young people, you can think about a range of emotional responses you want to cultivate. One of those would be excitement at large technological objects. Another might be around kind of stewardship and care. And materials is right at the center of those, I think. And that speaks to questions of place, questions of geoheritage. I work with colleagues in the Northeast who are doing work on geothermal from old mine sites, where that very much that kind of paying back of a legacy is a big part of what draws local communities into those projects. I've been talking too much.
So, just to make a quick point about visibility, I think that's really key. There was that report from IUM3 published a year or two ago, and then the recommendations, they mentioned how there's a lack of visibility or a lack of connection rather between critical minerals jobs and the net zero transition or the just transition. And university curricula descriptions are independent, university has no hand in them. But I do think if every geology or kind of critical mineral related field can make that link more explicit in their comms, publications, course descriptions, would we then see an uptick in university applications to study that?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. So your story about the equipment and so on reminded me that we used to take people to our test mine on the open days and just do an air blast underground, and it was awesome, and everybody wanted to come the instant we've done that. So there's a certain thing about the experience. We used some real state-of-the-art surveying equipment the other day when people came to an open day. But I think we're particularly majoring on that climate narrative.
Yeah.
So I hope that kind of works. And I think the messages that are going out in southwest England are to some extent working. So at Truro and Penwith College, which teaches a huge number of A-levels, and if I give you this figure that I just read, that there were 3,400 young people doing AS level geology in 2014, so 10 years ago. And then the system changed, so people couldn't do AS, and so now mostly people choose 3 A-levels, don't they, at high school? There are now only 200 students in the UK studying A-level geology. That sounds crazy, but in the last 2 years at Truro and Penwith College, the numbers choosing geology has gone from 23 to 40. And so I think people are getting positive messages coming from the local companies. They're seeing the news and the good news stories and seeing that there are careers there. So they're probably now scrubbing off Exeter because it's down the road and coming to see you in Durham or something to do their degrees. But I think we are seeing some light. And the trouble is that those stories are only in certain very specific places into the UK. And how do we make those positive narratives about doing good through studying and working in the mining industry and related geothermal metals extraction, get that wider across the country? I think that's the bigger task.
May I ask you a question? Because you mentioned the apprenticeship program. So I know from talking to my colleagues, so this is an undergraduate apprenticeship program. And I know from talking to colleagues in the university where I work that there is a kind of administrative difficulty of engaging with that, which is really about the costs of running those programs, and particularly around the engagement, because it's run through Ofsted up to age 19. There's issues of safeguarding with students that you don't normally get with the university students who safeguarding normally stops at 18. Most of our students will be 18 and over, but with the apprenticeship scheme, it's people up to age 19, that falls under Ofsted. So there are additional kind of complications around doing this. So the undergraduate apprenticeship scheme, the university where I work, the kind of general view is this is trickier than one might imagine. It's clear that Keele is doing an undergraduate apprenticeship program, launching in 2025. And your university is embracing this?
Yes, Exeter does a few degree apprenticeships, including business and so on, with some of the big companies. So they have big numbers then on the courses.
Yes.
And so they were keen to do this degree apprenticeship because it means that industry has to step up, and then some of them can use the apprenticeship levy to fund. And you're right, this is a distinction that mostly we're talking to the Office for Students in the universities, and then suddenly when you go into degree apprenticeships, because they're national curricula made with industry, then the trailblazer folks that sort it out, then they suddenly come under Ofsted. So there's a whole other regulation.
There is,
And we just have an office that deals with that, and
sounds like
they
a good
do
solution.
it. Yes, that's right. But so the numbers are relatively small, but they're paid for by the industry. And then we've taken the same course, and then we offer that to overseas students as well. And then the fees are large, like they are for all overseas degrees. Our students actually, in effect, are mature students, so they're in their late 20s, 30s, 40s who are on there, so we don't really have any safeguarding issues like that. It's a very different world to the A-level students and the under 18s.
But there's certainly interest in the apprenticeship model at a master's level and how that might work.
Oh, yes.
And I think, like many universities, the one in where I work is launching a whole fleet of masters driven by a range of different considerations. One is, keeping up with a sense of different demands from the workforce for different skills. One is around an income driver within universities, looking to diversify income streams. But a set of master's programs that are broadly themed around climate and environmental processes that have an MSc designation to them, and postgraduate taught programs in environmental sustainability, launching new programs around that, where there's an interest in working with an apprenticeship model in those too.
Oh, yes. No, so that's really interesting. So those are obviously a way that universities can interact perhaps more formally with industry. But just out of interest, as a show of hands, how many of you and your companies here host interns or work experience students? Do you mind putting your hand up if you do? So that's about half, which is pretty good. For those of you who don't, is there any particular reason why you don't? Is it because you haven't got capacity within your team? Is it something that you don't really know how to go about? It'd be interesting because as a student, it's one of those really like catch-22 situations. It's really hard to get a job or get work experience if you haven't got some kind of real-world experience on your CV. So internships and work experience can be a fantastic opportunity for people to actually kind of see what it's like working within that industry. And you know, it's something through Women in Mining, we've actually got an internship scheme where we partner with different companies and we work with them to create an internship profile. So it'll be 6 weeks or 8 weeks or perhaps longer. And we get applications into Women in Mining. The committee do like a first cut and then we present the top 5 candidates for each internship to the companies, which is a kind of easy way to get involved. And that wasn't meant to be a sales pitch for it, but if you are interested in partnering with Women in Mining for an internship this year, let me know. But I just wondered if any of you who are or aren't hosting interns or work experience would be happy to kind of comment as to whether you find that useful, whether you find it rewarding, whether you've ever hired anybody from an internship.
It's almost like I'm a plant here from Lucy. We did the Women in Mining internship program and attracted a young lady who was a PhD geochemist. So not all interns are necessarily people who have come straight out of university. Some of them have had life experience as well and are now looking for their next career opportunity. She did so well in the organisation, we made a job so that we would be able to keep her in the organisation. And she's gone on to bigger and better things in the industry since.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Oh.
Thanks. I can share some of our experience as well. Like we've got a student who came during their work experience from the school. And I mean, finding the mining industry is so interesting, and she's female, that she decided to go to CSM. And now after the CSM, she decided she doesn't want to go to Australia. She came back to Cornwall and she's working in the company as one of our mining engineers. I mean, it's a fantastic way to showcase how starting from the early age, from primary school to secondary school, and then having that, giving that opportunity to young generation to come to the work experience can expose them to see that there are other jobs in the sector in the UK that they can go to. And we've got a second apprenticeship now as well that, again, male, he's working with us at the same time he's doing his apprenticeship with CSM. It's fantastic to showcase that and talk about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would like to build on that and to question whether, if we're leaving, not a choice, but the invitation to people at sixth form age, should we say, whether that is too late. And now, at the risk of sounding like an old bastard here, right? I recall when I was in I was 15, 16, my chemistry teacher received a pack, or was requested to ask his students whether they wanted to do some mineral processing. And we received packs of actually wolframite from South Devon, I believe.
Okay.
And I recall very fondly panning wolframite, and that very thing was what got me into being a mining engineer.
Story.
When I was 16, and I was able to make the choice of the A-levels, which would be right to get into that profession. Now, I know that there are a lot of constraints on choosing A-levels, particularly, as we discussed. But I feel that the work probably needs to be done a little bit earlier to make people aware of what can be there. And of course, some people find rocks are boring, right? You know, I'm a mining engineer, geologist, mining engineer, you know. But I feel the work could be done earlier to entice people in and to persuade them or give them a chance to think about what qualifications they need.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's some research out there that actually suggests that speaking to kids at primary school age is actually the best time. That's where you've got the most opportunity to influence what people want to do and what their life opportunities are. And also, they then go home and speak to their parents and their grandparents. So actually, if you want to get a message out, apparently primary school's great. But you're totally right. Once people are on the track of, I've chosen these A-levels and they don't include science, then you're kind of set down a path, which is mad that you choose that effectively when you're 14 or 15.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's another one.
Thomas Regler with Hermet in France. I think you're touching on a very, very important topic because I'm taking up intern within my company, but I also see the European landscape, which is very, very tough for a lot of young students because at the same time, it's like how many students can we attract to these degrees? But then when I see the difficulty they have to find employment afterwards, I think the imbalance, which I heard as well in the last meeting of Women in Mining in Paris, was, oh, we need to attract these people, but there's tons of them around. And after a little while, they will just leave our industry totally. And I think, either they have to make career choices that a lot of them don't want to make, going to work overseas, to work a lot of career choices that will impact their personal life very strongly. So I would be curious to know from my academic colleagues in the UK how many students are finding employment, where do they find employment, if it's an easy pass. I don't think it's an easy pass, and I think then there's a scissor effect that I've seen in France and that we see. I'm an advisor in the Emerald Masters, the Engineering Resources Masters that held between different European universities. Basically, it seems that every year we have a huge challenge to keep financing these degrees, and a lot of the professors driving these degrees, they're closer to retiring than starting their career. So I think we have a huge, not just gap in terms of who do we attract, but are we able to train the next generation in geoscience-related fields, not just like deep geology or deep mining, technical fields. I'll stop here.
Maybe I could just one small reaction to that point. I mean, there is an issue with the decline of the closure of a number of geoscience departments in the UK. What you end up with is that sort of concentration of geoscience in a few institutions now. That's likely to have some negative regional consequences for people being able to pursue that from particular geographies that are not served by universities offering geoscience degrees. I think there's something too about the kind of a narrowing of the approaches that get taught if you have fewer institutions actually teaching that. So there is something that speaks to your point about what happens to the provision of geoscience education, and not only what's happening to kind of the talent pipeline. That would be one observation on that point.
Yeah, and I think, is it encouraging to hear that it's not just a problem in the UK? I'm not sure, but let's try and have a bit more of a positive think then. And George, coming back to the government, some of the talks this morning we've heard about funding for innovation and some of the fantastic projects that are happening across the materials space, not just within mining. And what are the benefits of the UK kind of being positioned as a global leader in this critical minerals space? How does the government see that? What are the other levers that the government has to pull to be able to maintain that position, do you think?
Yes. I mean, I know that Martin Cherrington spoke earlier about Innovate UK, which for those who are unaware, Climate is a £15 million fund from Innovate UK looking at rare earth elements and how do you increase the security of supply for those in the UK, not just looking at from recycled sources, but also what skills are needed to equip the UK with the right capabilities to recover them. And so I think government will be looking at what the next stage of that could look like. Another project which I'm quite happy to announce is that DBT has secured a small pot of money under the Economic Deterrence Initiative and will be working with industry and partner organisations on a series of smaller projects to support critical mineral skills and innovation development. I know that we're in touch with IOM3 and Critical Minerals Association on what those workshops could look like. So you're right, though. I think it's these like small pots of funding are really helpful in the short term. I think longer term, we'd hope for something kind of more certain to keep ourselves at the vanguard of R&D in the critical mineral space.
Yeah, but even some funding is a much better place than we were a couple of years ago. So that's brilliant, thank you. There was a question earlier about if you're going out and doing outreach and engagement, how do you know what to talk about and what assets are there? We've had a stand today for the Perceptions Working Group for the Critical Minerals Association, which has got some of those ideas on it. But on the CMA website as well, there is actually a tab which has got quite a few links to different resources that are already out there. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel if you are going to go back to a school or go to some of the local communities around your projects, for example. There's a lot of material already out there that's great, that's linked to the curriculum. You can use that. Wonderful. Thanks for that, George. So are there any particular incentives that you think we should get in place to facilitate this talent gap being bridged that we haven't spoken about already today?
I suppose industry opening up your purses to fund scholarships is a really basic thing. Very interesting that Durham's expanding its masters, because we've been in a phase of consolidation, because we've seen our MSc numbers at Camborne School of Mines, but I think in other departments as well, go down. So people are doing their 3 years undergraduate bachelor's degree, and then they can get a job, and they don't want to spend another lot of money getting their masters. So there's a sinusoidal relationship, as the mining industry is up, the number of people that come on our masters anyway goes the opposite way, and then, it turns. And so we really want people to come on the masters. We want to reach our alumni who've gone off elsewhere with some more clever blended learning kind of courses. And I think asking industry to come and partnership with that to help people to be able to afford that 4th year, that's what you need if you really want to go on the express route through to chartership. That's where, when I go to international conferences, the leaders I see there have very often come through our master's courses. So we really want to enable people to go on those. So come and talk to us and open your purses at least a little bit to help folks do that 4th year, because it's really important.
So, if I'm thinking about the conversation within the university where I work, and the conversation is around innovation in the provision of education. So, what is that discussion composed? And it'll typically fall out along several lines. One will be around master's programs, we've talked about that. Another will be around CPD, continuing professional development. And with colleagues in earth sciences and other parts of the physical science and law and anthropology, I've been spending some time thinking about what an offer might be in CPD that looked at critical resource supply. And we've got the essence of kind of the big pitch, what we think we're doing. But what we really don't, and this is again to your point about what can the industry do, what we really don't know is the detail of that. So I would be very interested in hearing from people working in the sector, what would a good CPD program look like from the sector's point of view? What are the sets of skills that a university could realistically deliver, recognizing that you may need a range of skills that the university sector's maybe not cut out to do. So one thing universities do is we produce bulk graduates, lots of them, at scale, to a certain quality standard. And there are some things the university sector doesn't do as well as FE colleges and others. So there's a proper ecology of education here. So if it comes to university provision, what is it that the university sector, where I work, can do? That's one kind of ask of the sector. Knowledge. Another is to echo your point. So if we have a shared interest, let's say, in ensuring a steady pipeline of people coming into earth science, geoscience, I think the sector, and certainly the programs where I work, have a shared commonality of interest in that. And it can be relatively small amounts of money, scholarships that tip somebody from going into environmental sustainability course or taking a geoscience course. A recognition that the industry's got their back, recognizing the kind of, seeing the potential. That can really make a difference to somebody's decision at that critical moment, leaving school, going to university, of which program they'll go into. So that's a kind of a second ask. That's not necessarily a really large one, but it's quite specific and it does make a difference.
Wonderful, thank you. So we do actually have an extra 5 minutes or so, I've been informed, because drinks actually aren't going to be ready until past. So you're stuck with us for a few minutes longer. I don't know if any of you saw, but out in the lobby, we've had a piece of paper stuck up with the question, you know, what can we do to bridge the talent gap? Have you got any questions for it? And there were a couple of questions that were stuck on that, which were asking, what routes actually are there into the minerals industry? How do I get into it? So if we can maybe answer that. I mean, George, what route have you come into the minerals industry?
Oh, goodness. I'm definitely a generalist through and through. I can't lie and say I've got a minerals-related degree. I've been in this role for 1.5 years now, and I found simply speaking to the CMA invaluable. They've really kind of brought me up to speed on a kind of policy level. And also, for my coming into this role, it was through a graduate program called the Fast Stream. You did 3 one-year rotations and then came off that scheme and came onto this, and that equipped me with the skill set to pick up like thorny policy issues quickly, assess appropriate levers to pull, and identify experts of people who can help me with those issues. So, yeah, I think working in the minerals industry isn't just you're out working in the field. There's a much broader array of careers out there if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a really valid point. I mean, coming to conferences like this is fantastic. If you're at an early stage in your career, engaging with groups such as Women in Mining and the Young Mining Professionals can be really useful as well. And I think there's also that sense, you know, you don't just have to be a geologist or a mining engineer. Actually, the minerals industry's got a huge task ahead of it. We need people who are able to do machine learning and AI. You need people who are social specialists to engage with people and make sure that these projects are delivered in a fair and just way. You need people who understand finance and are able to attract it and communicate what they're doing as well. So it is a whole host of skills. Does anybody on the floor have any questions that they wanted to ask or points they wanted to raise? Yeah. Don't know if we've got a microphone or whether...
Yeah, I've got one.
Just shout.
I've just got an observation that that this is what happens in Australia anyhow, is that the working class community embrace mining. They cannot line up quick enough to get there. The more educated the community becomes in some sectors, they turn against mining. They think it's all oil, gas, coal. So I think the industry and the universities have to promote it, that it's not just all like that. There's a social divide, and I think that's where half the battle's coming.
Can I just pick up on that? So one of the things that struck me from the earlier conversations this morning, and I think it was Noah Law in the early breakfast session, really made the point about the social value proposition around this is absolutely key. And I think that's the key thing that unites, rather than see it as, you know, there is a class issue, but rather than see it as a divide in that way, I think often the opposition is opposition in terms of what's the social value here, what's the long-term benefits from this extractive activity? And that it goes to this question of demonstrating that over a long period of time. And I think that's kind of the big prize to lose here. That's the thing that really need to get right. So, you know, one of the prompts for us was to think about what happens if we don't act in this space. And I think that's something. If we miss that social value piece, it's not going to happen.
I'm not sure I would agree with that in the UK. I don't think that, you know, at the Camborne School of Mines, I don't think I see that divide. I would say when we were running the mining engineering degree entry through UCAS previously, one profile would be a lot of the people who came to be mining engineers, so not geologists, which is different, mining engineers, they had relatives in the industry, so they had knowledge of it, but they weren't from a particular sort of person or sort of class. And geologists come because they like volcanoes and fossils and all the things that interest people. And the main class problem would be that is how do you make sure that some young people have aspirations? So some people already know that they can go to university and they'll be professional mining engineers, and some people might think that they can only be the miners, although they can get paid very good salaries for doing that. But that's when FE comes in again to allow people to step through And even if they start off with lower aspirations, that they can move through to the managerial and leadership jobs later on.
Yeah, I think we've got one point here and then we'll come to you.
Hi, I'm a student at Imperial College London studying geology at the moment, so I think I can bring a slightly fresh perspective on this. It's that I was lucky enough to get myself an internship this summer that's in exploration, provided me a lot of experience with Aberdeen Minerals, really good experience. And I know certainly all of my friends also went for summer internships in various industries, and that has massively shaped how they look at their graduate jobs. Most are going into either the same industry or have direct return offers from their companies, etc., etc. So, like, from our perspective, the career very much starts while you're still at university, because we don't get very much professional experience, and there is almost a desperation for internships. And the mining industry, by comparison to others, with geological engineering and such, or oil even, like BP has a very extensive internship program. The mining industry seems basically opaque. You can't get that view into it. The major companies aren't offering schemes anymore, and for minor companies, well, there is obviously a resurgence in the UK, but understanding how to actually get those opportunities. Obviously, Camborne School of Mines has very close links with all the Cornish companies. Certainly from other universities, you don't even see how to make it. Obviously it's quite a close industry, and it's based a lot on these sorts of events and informal opportunities. So my question basically is, how can the companies engage better with students and actually invest in our training? Because that's how you're actually going to get the students who are coming through into the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And I was really encouraged to see quite how many people put their hands up to say that they offered internships. So maybe there's something we can do through the CMA to kind of promote those companies, advertise it, get in touch with the universities more, and just let people know that that is a route to finding an internship. Because I think you're right, there aren't necessarily the formal graduate programs within a lot of these mining companies. It tends to be meeting somebody and cheekily asking them if you can have some work experience, in my experience anyway. So yeah, maybe that's something we can take away from this and look at. Jamie?
Lucy, I recently read a book, which I actually forget the name of, but it was written by Andre Hoffman, who's the director from La Roche, from the family. And he's an environmentalist and everything. And he highlighted the case study of INSEAD changing all of their whole structure to basically be sustainable and to incorporate sustainability throughout their MBAs. And I just wondered whether or not, with that experience, and I don't know how successful or not that has been, as to whether or not, on the back of, I get a steady stream of people from ecology, from zoology, and from multiple other courses, students who want to get involved in sustainability into the mining industry, and whether or not incorporating sustainability more, maybe it already is, but more into the engineering or the geology degrees might actually influence more younger people into the mining career path.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to one of Gavin's initial points actually as well, is the kind of how are we packaging this up? How are we selling it? Yeah, it's a very valid point. I wonder if that's something you've actually seen in.
You go first.
Oh, okay. So I think there are examples of where that's happening. So that where geoscience courses are still being offered, if you get the modules are being supplemented with more environmentally themed, sustainability themed. If I think about my own, the university where I am, the Earth Science Department is offering a master's program now that is on environmental sustainability, which is teaching a set of methods that are applicable across a whole range of sectors. So they could be applied to the mining sector, they could be applied to any other sector, but it's about numeracy and techniques for things like life cycle analysis, environmental impact assessment, and a range of other methods that are applicable to multiple sectors, which is really why I was kind of raising the question at the beginning about what do we mean by a critical minerals job? What is a critical minerals skill? And actually that's more plural than probably we think. It's quite diverse. Sorry, go please.
Say something just very slightly different is I think people come to study geology because they like geology, and to have strong multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research, you first need the strong disciplines. I don't think we have any particular plans to put like multidisciplinary or social science into year one geology. They come and they want to learn geology or mining engineering or whatever it is. And I think as the students mature through the system, they get more and more interested in the other topics. So as soon as we get to masters, you start talking about the social side, and they get really enthusiastic and interested in that. So you see this nice progression as you go through. And I think the other thing is when you go to a university, there's your experience of the things that you're taught within the modules on the courses, and then there's the whole environment. And every time a company comes to do pint and pasty at CSM, or there's a research seminar, it's all what they're doing in ESG space and these things. It just comes through the ether in the department as well. And I think that's really important, what people are exposed to there too.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, I've just had the nod from Kirsty. We had a bit of extra time anyway, and thank you so much for all of your inputs. So perhaps we can continue the conversation over drinks, but I just want to say a big thank you to all of the panellists and for everybody for being so engaged in it. Thank you very much.